Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. It gives you everything you need in one place for free, which you can use right from your phone or computer. Creation tools allow you to record and edit your podcast so it sounds great. They'll even distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard everywhere: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more. You can easily make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. All right, welcome back to another episode of It Is What It Is podcast. I'm your host, Cody Kelly. Connect with me, IGCVMK33. I love to just hear from you, engage with you. We are covering a very special topic today when he talks about really moving toward reconciliation in law enforcement, really trying to get a voice from the law enforcement. I have with me a very special friend and guest on the show, Simone Ager. She is in law enforcement. She has agreed to be on the show, not like I said before, not to speak on behalf of all law enforcement, but as somebody that is their careers in law enforcement, as somebody that puts their life on the line, really wants to be that advocate and that voice of hope and reason. So if you're here, just welcome Simone Agers to the show. Simone, how you doing?
I'm doing just fine. I'm so glad to be on the show with you, Cody. Like you said, a friend, and I'm just really excited to be on the show to talk about such an interesting topic that's happening so, prevalent in the world right now. So I'm excited. I
appreciate that. We're excited to have you. I want to get into it. First off, I know that's an awkward space. Yeah. It's like finding out a relative of yours did something heinous, right? I want to get your thoughts, your initial thoughts when you look at the footage, when you look at George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, you look at Tamir Rice, you look at these historical evidence. We can just keep it to Chicago, just at Fred Hampton. What is your feeling toward this as a law enforcement officer?
So first, as like when you watch videos, I'm watching it as not a law enforcement officer, but just as a Black person. So as a law enforcement officer, there are strategies and things we are learned and trained to do in situations. And as I look at each one of these videos, the Ahmaud Arbery, the George Floyd, like when I look at those videos, I see how things went completely left from what, and not saying I'm speaking for everyone that, is in law enforcement, but they went completely left of what we were trained to do and how we were taught to communicate and handle crisis situations. So my immediate response was like, this could have went 1,000 other different ways. And George Floyd would have still had his life, or Ahmaud Arbery would have still been here today. So,
right.
Yeah, just complete heartbrokenness and sadness. And I think any other person could feel the same feeling when watching these videos.
Is it awkward? Like you said, when you watch these videos, you're not watching it as a law enforcement officer. You're watching it as a human being, as a Black person specifically. Does it put you in an awkward space? Because you're both. You're both, or really three things, right? Both human, obviously, as a Black person, and then as a law enforcement officer. Is there internal conflict somewhere?
Cody, yes, absolutely. Because you have to look at things from like literally two sides. Like just one person you look at, and you obviously are outraged, angry, but you have to think of the possible, well, what if, or what happened prior to, or, what did he do to not cause this, but how did the initial situation go down in the beginning? So because I've been placed in a lot of different situations, I know that the outcome is not always how you intend it to be, or your initial approach doesn't always go how you want it to go. So to me, I'm thinking like, well, what was the first thing that he said? Or how did he approach him initially? So I think for me, I have to see things from being a human being and a law enforcement officer. And to me, that is it's very conflicting to me, but I think I've just lost for words because I can't.
Is it I guess, what side, and I hate to say it like that, but what side wins? I mean, obviously, like you stated, you want to naturally give the benefit of a doubt.
Right.
You want to believe that people are naturally good-hearted and that the intent was not there to harm anybody's life. But when you see something continuously happen and repetitively happen, what side at the end of the day sticks to you and say, you know what, whatever I really believe and feel, I know that deep down inside, this is the truth?
The only thing, like, you can't, there's no way to just choose. You have to go off facts, and you have to go off, every situation is different. So you have to go off the facts of the situation. So there's no right or wrong, or, I mean, there is, but there's no way to decide which side you want to play. It's go off the facts. With this situation with George Floyd, like I said, my response was, I'm angry, I'm outraged, and then I wanted to get the facts. The facts allowed me to get my feelings, to feel how I wanted to feel, which allowed me to go towards, the police officer was completely wrong. So there's no way to decide in that moment how you're going to feel or how the situation is going to be. But yeah.
Totally understand. What are the word of the day, or I should say the last couple of days, has been defunding the police. If you speak to those who affiliate themselves with the left as far as political ideology, defunding the police means serious reformation, reallocating resources to actually initiatives that help minority communities, like funding education, so taking a third of their budget, throwing it towards schools and things. Right. That it does not mean getting rid of the police. When you speak to individuals who align themselves with the right, defunding the police means to get rid of the police, literally a literal translation. What, as a law enforcement agent, if they're allocated or if they're presenting this idea of defunding, what does that say to you? How does that stick?
My initial response to hearing about defunding the police, I was actually completely against it, for obvious reasons. But for my specific reason was, well, who's going to, if something goes down, then what's going to happen? So obviously that's our safety net, our security. People feel they put a lot of pressure on the police officers and law enforcement to handle situations or any crisis. But then as I dug deeper into it and started having more conversations with other people, I started realizing what defunding the police actually meant, which, like you said, allocating other funds to different parts, like, not saying that it could all be under a different umbrella, but for example, if there was a suicide, having a specific team respond to that instead of having police officers respond to that situation every time. Maybe we can allocate that money to a different program or a different agency that handles those situations, or domestic violence. Police officers, they just kind of just want to have the peace, just want the situation to be done with. But having somebody specifically trained in that area where they're specifically dealing with those situations. So I think for me, it opened up my brain to start thinking more, think bigger on the grand scheme of things. When you mean defunding the police, it doesn't mean to completely get away from policing, but not even just allocating more money to trainings either, but more so having different agencies, different people in specific areas to handle more specific events in the world, I guess.
Public safety in the future. What does that look like? Like you said, if it's handling different departments, I've really been trying to do a lot of research. And like you said, the police, law enforcement in general, gets called in for every situation, even if it doesn't necessarily fall under their umbrella, because the default mode is to call law enforcement. So if there's a domestic situation, it's to call law enforcement, and maybe possibly so, because there could be a life in danger. But if there's a mental health situation, it's to call law enforcement, and that might not be the appropriate vehicle and team that should handle that. What does public safety in the future look like? Will there be teams within teams? Will there be specific agencies for specific things that all of this could fall under maybe one parent org, locally or civically? I mean, what does that look like?
I can't really speak to that because I'm not sure. But I think the way that we're going right now with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, and it doesn't look like it's stopping now, I think that's what the world is pushing towards. And I think that would be, in my opinion, a better option for public safety. Because if you're thinking about the public safety, it's, the police officers are not able to handle every situation effectively. And that's the only way we can have effective public safety. So like you said, mental health situations, the police officers were literally just trained maybe earlier this year or late last year on mental health. So think of how long policing has been, in the world, and they're just now being trained on mental health. So I think for, like you said, for the grand scheme of public safety, I think the direction that policing or law enforcement should be going, or may potentially will be going in the future, is to have different agencies under an umbrella, essentially. But I can't really speak to that because I don't know.
And when it comes to understanding kind of the concept of policing and kind of how American police forces have been arranged, right? Dealing with slave catching and just draconian laws and just kind of how it has evolved over time. When you put on that uniform, is there in the culture of law enforcement, is there conflict? Is there tension? Is there like, no, you're blue? You know what I'm saying? Is there something that we don't see, or maybe Hollywood kind of dramatizes over?
Like I said, I'm not a police officer. However, I am in law enforcement, and I do have to wear a uniform. And that is absolutely correct, which also has me like, I feel the most conflicted when I put on my uniform, I should say, because there is this underlying code of, I got you, you got me. And there are those, it's like a few speckle of people who are like, yeah, I got you. However, what you're doing is wrong. And I think there was a video floating around. I think the woman, she was a police officer. Her name was Crystal. You hear her in the video, the protesting videos, you see her correcting another officer, almost like shoving him away from whatever he was doing, which was like, obviously a lady was on the ground. He was pushing her away or whatever. So you see her standing up for what's right. And that's very few and far in between, because when those situations happen, when you stick up for what's right, it's almost as if you are shunned, or it's like you're one of them and you're supposed to be one of us. So, and yeah, so I don't want to get too deep into it because there's a lot of things that I'm very conflicted in certain situations where I've had to stand up for what's right, because it's very simple to me. What's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And understanding that these are people that we are literally here to protect and to serve and to help rehabilitate. We have to be the moral compass for them. Even it requires us to be extra morally, I don't know the word I'm trying to say, but we have to be extra. So if they're looking to us, then we got to put on our best and stand up for them and stand up for what's right.
I think it's safe to say that there is distrust between communities, right? And maybe this distrust has been there and it has grown over time. What does restoring trust between law enforcement, between communities of color, between Black people specifically, what does that look like? Like, what if you can make a strategic plan to say, first we do this, second we do that? What does restoring trust look like?
When you first asked me about this podcast and talking about reconciliation and I guess mending the two, the first thing that came to mind to me was accountability. And I think that is the very first step to even move past or move towards anything positive. I think we have to take accountability and acknowledge what is happening so blatantly in our face, which is racial injustice. So I think once we get to the point of accountability, then we can build some type of trust, which will eventually help us. Actually, there's a step in between that I think: accountability and then communication. And somewhere along the lines, there needs to be some compassion. And once we start mending those things and kind of like molding it together, I think that'll be a safe place for us to mend the relationship between the community and the law enforcement.
Is there a governing board? I'm sure like every company has an ethics board. They have an HR department. My company has an HR department. Mm-hmm. Is there like a HR department for law enforcement, that maybe the public isn't aware of?
Yes. And yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, just for the sake of time, yes, there is. However, how things are handled and how things are taken up does not directly shoot to HR. You know, soon as in the regular world or when people have other situations, there's a complaint and it immediately goes to HR. You know, or you know, your supervisor takes it up to HR. I think in law enforcement, there's a lot of people in between before you can get to HR that somewhere along the line things get lost and kind of just like swept away. So yes, there is.
Okay. And I want to respond to this comment. One of our viewers wrote, what about interracial justice? And maybe this is a fair question. The argument from the other side is you always highlight police brutality, but over 90, I don't believe what Trump says, 99.9%, but overwhelmingly majority of law enforcement agents are good people and don't break the law. What about like black on black crime, right? What is your answer to that?
Well, I guess for me, I think for me, it is just people are people. And people make poor decisions and people do poor things, make poor decisions every day. And I think, yes, black on black crime is a thing, but I don't think it's something that needs to be highlighted in a way that takes away from the attention of what's really happening here. Because you have white on white crime, you have, cultures, all different type of cultures and race do a lot of crimes to each other. So I think that is a conversation that needs to be had. But right now, I think the main focus on police brutality is what's really happening, what's capturing the focus, because things, there's a lot of things in between that you can't justify on why somebody would decide to shoot another person. However, but when you have a blatant camera that shows a guy kneeling on the officer kneeling on someone's neck just to get them to comply, I think that's on a grander, that's just bigger fish to fry to me.
Gotcha. What are, if, like I said, you're in law enforcement, what are the appropriate steps? Let's switch places.
Okay.
You're called to the scene. I realize that might be, you're in a different part of law enforcement, but as somebody that upholds the law, you have that civic responsibility and duty. You're called to the scene. You're switching places. What is the normal steps? Like when a person is called or the police are called to investigate somebody who is acting unseemly, what are the steps? What is that from a textbook? What do they train you on? What do those steps look like?
Like I said, I can't speak for policing because I'm not a police officer. However, I've been in multiple crisis situations. I've handled multiple crisis situations. And the initial thing is there's always something is wrong with the person, right? So there's a situation, there's an incident. Then you ask the person kind of like for them to give you their, opinion of what happened. Then you gather the facts on what's happened and what's circulating around the area as you call evidence about what the person is saying is happening. And then you kind of, I guess in my place, I would just try to figure out how I can best serve this person to get this person to do whatever it is that needs to be happening. So if there's specific situations where somebody was called to the scene because George Floyd, I can only resort back to him because he's the top. But somebody was called to the scene because apparently he had some counterfeit money. So they called the police on him. Now, instead of the police officer just immediately arresting him, maybe if there would have been some conversation or communication between the officer and George Floyd to get an understanding of what took place in George's eyes and not, the store clerk's eyes, maybe the situation would have been handled different. So there's a lot of different ways to approach a situation. There's not just a textbook answer of like how to handle a situation.
Do you think as time progresses that militarization will reduce? And I mean by I'm seeing a lot of talk that we need to equip ourselves with guns, and I'm not against guns, not for guns. I have a very neutral stance on guns because it's inherently dangerous, or it presents danger, but at the same time, it saves lives. You can't argue the fact that it doesn't.
Right.
Your feeling about being armed. Should citizens would you recommend as a law enforcement officer that all citizens possess legal firearms? Is that something that you would recommend?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Absolutely not. Especially from somebody who worked in the mental health field. I also believe that just because you are a citizen, I just think that there needs to be an extensive requirement that allows you to have not so much extensive, but you need to present some healthy traits in order to possess a gun. I believe so. But speaking to the militarized theory of policing, I pray that they get away from that. I think they're moving towards that direction, given the Breonna Taylor's situation at her home and her losing her life, and with them bursting into her home and kicking down her door. I can't believe if there was recently a petition signed for them to stop that, but I'm praying that that's the way that they're trying to go.
Makes sense. Last hard question, I promise you, and I'll let you off the hook. Going forward, is this a moment or is this a movement? And speaking for on the side of law enforcement, because like you said, they're good people in every group, right? Mm-hmm. Is this something that is going to spark this needed transformation? I was looking at the police officer in Atlanta, Georgia. Obviously, the Spelman student, Morehouse student, was tasered on video, caught on video while the couple in front of him, the white couple in front of him, was allowed to go freely. They were pulled out of the car and arrested, and those two officers have been fired. Is this because this is needed change, or is this just a momentary reaction?
I would like to think that this is because it is needed change. I think this moment will forever be a movement. And I believe that what's happening now I think these things have always been happening. But now that we have the phone and we have the video, there is more proof to show the injustices. So I think that these things are just needed to happen. And I don't think that they need to just happen so quickly that they just to pacify the situations or the things that's happening. But I believe that they're moving in the right direction to let policing and to let law enforcement know that we have to keep our cool. We have to, when situations get tough, we have to keep our cool and we have to do things in a just way. And the way that situation was handled was just completely outrageous. And just to watch all four, this situation, I don't know why, but I watched all of the body cams and I just watched this situation over and over again. And I'm just like, that could have really been handled a completely different way. So I think because people are starting to see, and then you have the body cams, I think these things
makes sense. Are you a fan of the body cams? Describe body cams to us. Simone, can you hear me? Simone, you're breaking up. All right. I think she's experiencing some technical difficulties. Wait for a couple minutes, but definitely loved her responses. Understand where she's coming from. Being in law enforcement is definitely a commitment and a civic responsibility. When she agreed to be on the show to really just, show support and realize that, hey, we're not in this by ourselves. And as a member of the African-American community, as a human being, just her just commitment to this, she really wanted to support. I will connect with Simone later. It seems that some of her technology isn't working correctly. But I just want to thank her for being on the show. I want to thank her for her responses and the courage that she has showed, because it takes great courage. I asked her even before this started, hey, are you sure? Because every agency, every organization has their own rules, especially when it comes to social media. And she said, hey, look, I already spoke to my HR department. They're cool. Obviously, I'm speaking for myself and not on behalf of them. But as a law enforcement agent, she wanted to ensure that, she could be of service and really educate. So I'll reconnect with her. But that was pretty much all the questions I had. But definitely feel free to reach out to Simone. I'll share her contact information in our post-production videos to be able to connect with her. But I thank you all for tuning in. And until next time, this has been an episode of It Is What It Is podcast. Thanks.